In Nietzsche's The Gay Science, a madman runs into a marketplace shouting that he's looking for God. The crowd laughs. He says the real question was who killed God, because we did. God, as the thing that told us what was worth living for. Then a terrifying question emerged. What happens when nothing is inherently meaningful anymore? This video is about 7 cinematic answers to that question. Let's dive in.
Vem är du?
Jag är döden.
Kommer du för att hämta mig?
Jag har redan länge gått vid din sida.
Det vet jag.
Är du beredd?
Min kropp är rädd. Inte jag själv.
The Seventh Seal, Ingmar Bergman, 1957. A knight returns from the Crusades to a land ravaged by plague. On the beach, he encounters a figure in a black cloak. Death has come to collect him. The knight proposes a game of chess, not a wager to survive, but a way to buy time before the end, time enough to perform one act that might mean something. Nietzsche draws a distinction. The knight's whole arc dramatizes. Passive nihilism looks like disbelief, but functions as exhaustion. The old motions of belief, performed long after the conviction behind them has drained away. At a church, he kneels at what he takes to be a confessional and unburdens himself to the priest behind the grate. Death in the priest's place, listening. He no longer expects an answer to change anything. The seeking itself has become the ritual, hollowed out, repeated, because stopping would mean admitting there was never anything to find. That's the chess game's real function, not a wager for survival, but a way to keep the question open a little longer, because closing it is the only thing the knight actually fears. The final image, a procession of figures, the knight among them, holding hands as death leads them across a hillside, gives him no resolution. What the knight does manage in his last act is to save a family of traveling performers from death's reach. Not an answer to the silence, but a gesture made anyway, inside it. If passive nihilism is the exhausted repetition of a search that no longer believes in its object, this is the one moment the knight breaks the ritual, not with certainty, but with care.
Did you kill the white man who killed you?
I'm not dead.
What name were you given at birth, stupid white man?
Blake. William Blake.
Dead Man, Jim Jarmusch, 1995. William Blake, an accountant from Cleveland, arrives in the frontier town of Machine expecting a job that no longer exists. Within a day, he's shot through the chest, on the run for a killing he committed in self-defense. An outcast named Nobody finds him dying and decides, based on the name alone, that this is the poet William Blake reincarnated, and resolves to guide him back to the spirit world. The town itself is passive nihilism rendered as architecture, factories that produce nothing but smoke, a civilization running on momentum after burning through whatever values once justified it. Nobody is the active alternative, the only character who has metabolized the collapse and built something else from it. Ritual, purpose, a death he can actually orchestrate. The wilderness strips away the accountant. What's left starts shooting people and reading it as poetry. A man whose only remaining value is the one nobody handed him. Jarmusch doesn't resolve that bleakness with an outside grace breaking in. He completes it. Nobody places the dying Blake in a funeral canoe and pushes it into the sea. Blake watches Nobody die defending him, then looks up at the sky as the canoe drifts past the horizon. The active nihilist's logic simply runs all the way through to its only honest endpoint. Annihilation, given a shape, nothing more, nothing redeemed.
Shakespeare, murder will out.
Who said anything about murder?
You did.
Did I?
And I say, if he can do it and get away with it, and he chooses not to be bothered by the ethics, then he's home free. Remember, history is written by the winners.
Crimes and Misdemeanors, Woody Allen, 1989. Judah Rosenthal, a respected ophthalmologist, has his mistress murdered when she threatens to expose their affair. He spends the following weeks consumed by guilt, certain a moral universe is about to collect on its debt. It never does. The film's other thread follows Louis Levy, an elderly philosopher whose lectures insist meaning is something people construct through their choices, and who, partway through filming, jumps out a window, leaving a note as thin as the rest of his life's optimism. Judah's arc moves through both halves of active nihilism. First, the discovery. His father's old sermons about an all-seeing God turn out to police nothing. Then, the use. He converts the wreckage of an authority he no longer fears into the tool that removes Dolores from his life. The guilt that follows isn't proof the old order still has a claim on him. It's the residue burning off. Levy is the inverted failure. A man who insisted he'd already done the work Nietzsche demanded, built his own meaning, needed no inherited God. The film stages his death as a quiet refutation of that claim. Allen ends the film with Judah free, prosperous, untouched. The closest thing to a verdict comes from Levy himself, in footage recorded before his death. We are the sum total of our choices. Judah's choice cost him nothing. That's the joke, and Allen never breaks it to deliver a moral.
Később azonban mindez már egy fabatkát sem ért. A zavaros fennhéjázás ugyanis szerette volna az isteni harmóniát egészében kisajátítani.
Werkmeister Harmonies, Belatar, 2000. In a small Hungarian town, János Valuska spends his nights running errands and his days caring for his uncle, a reclusive musicologist convinced Western harmony took a wrong turn centuries ago. A traveling circus arrives carrying nothing but a stuffed whale and a faceless figure called the Prince, and within days, the town's men march on the hospital, beating every patient they find. János gives passive nihilism its purest form. Not despair, but the quiet suspension of the categories that would let him judge what he's watching. He moves through the riot the way he moved through the bar in the opening scene, arranging drunks into planets to act out a solar eclipse. Present, generous even, but operating where good and evil have stopped registering as live questions. He doesn't excuse the mob and doesn't oppose it. The moral vocabulary that would let him do either has gone quiet in him. The Prince is what moves into that kind of silence. Active nihilism, in Nietzsche's sense, invents nothing. It finds the wreckage of collapsed values and aims it, and the Prince's entire method is pointing a crowd's appetite at a building full of the defenseless. Tar ends on Georgi alone in the wreckage, visiting a János now committed to an asylum, mute and unreachable after what he witnessed. He stares at the whale's corpse with the look of a man confirming something he already suspected, that the universe doesn't resolve into harmony, and that knowing this changes nothing about how the violence plays out, or who survives it intact.
¿Qué quieres? ¿Sí? Sí. El Nelina nos va a sacar un retrato, todos como recuerdo.
¿Y con qué máquina?
Con una que me regalaron mis papás. Ponerse a echarlo. Tú no te muevas.
Viridiana, Luis Buñuel, 1961. Days before taking her vows, a young novice visits the uncle who raised her. Struck by her resemblance to his dead wife, he drugs her, stops himself before going further, then lies and tells her he didn't, hoping the lie makes the convent impossible. He hangs himself before she can sort out what's true. She inherits the estate and fills it with beggars, determined to build a working charity in place of the cloistered life she lost. This is where passive nihilism takes hold, though it looks like conviction at first. Viridiana believes her moral vocabulary, the Christian language of charity, can organize the world around her. Left alone in the house, the beggars stage a drunken feast that restages the Last Supper as gluttony and vandalism, ending in an attempted rape. Proof the vocabulary she's operating in was never something the world agreed to honor. Nietzsche's passive nihilist isn't created by an argument. He's created by exactly this kind of evidence, repeated until believing stops being possible. Buñuel's ending refuses her even a tragic clarity. Assaulted, she walks away from her charity for good and ends up playing cards with her cousin Jorge and his mistress, accepting an ordinary domestic arrangement in place of either sainthood or despair. That's the texture of passive nihilism Nietzsche worried about most, a quiet settling for whatever's left once the old values stop paying out.
Marcello, Marcello.
Te ne prego, sta zitto. Marcello, dove sei?
Fascista!
No, Marcello.
Anche lui
Che
è
cosa
fascista.
fai? Marcello,
Questo qui.
ma che vuoi fare?
Questo qui era un fascista.
Marcello, ma...
The Conformist, Bernardo Bertolucci, 1970. Marcello Clerici doesn't believe in fascism. He believes in normality, and fascism happens to be the system currently offering it. When his superiors order him to arrange the assassination of Professor Quadri, his former mentor and now an exiled anti-fascist, Marcello accepts not out of conviction, but because refusing would disrupt the smoothness he's built his identity around. Nietzsche's passive nihilism isn't just exhaustion. It's the refusal of the work that's supposed to follow the collapse of inherited values, deciding for yourself what's worth wanting. Marcello never does that work. Every choice he makes outsources the question to whoever's holding power, so he's never the one who decided anything, only the one who agreed. When the moment comes, he sits in the car and watches as Quadri is stabbed to death, and Anna, Quadri's wife, runs to his car, begging to be let in, then is shot fleeing into the woods. He doesn't pull a trigger. He doesn't have to. The whole architecture of his nihilism is built to make sure responsibility always lands somewhere else. The final scene refuses to let this end with the regime that enabled it. As a crowd drags down a statue of Mussolini, Marcello spots a stranger, decides he resembles the man who abused him as a child, and denounces him as a fascist collaborator in Quadri's murder, a crime Marcello himself committed. The dictator falls. The man built to redirect blame simply finds someone new to redirect it onto.
Justice. Eternal life? Good God, man. Show me a religion that prepares one for nothingness, for death. That's a church I might enter. Yours prepares one only for more life, for dreams, illusions, lies.
The Sunset Limited, Tommy Lee Jones, 2011. Black, an ex-convict turned believer, stops White, a philosophy professor, from throwing himself in front of a train, then brings him home to talk him out of trying again. The entire film is the conversation that follows. 90 minutes in one room, two men, no plot beyond which worldview survives the night. White speaks passive nihilism out loud instead of just living it. He explains with total clarity why nothing carries enough weight to keep choosing it. I cling to the hope of nothingness, he tells Black. Almost a textbook restatement of what Nietzsche called the will to nothingness. Not strength turning against life, but the last motion left in a will that's already given up. Black pushes back with his own story, prison, violence, a conversion that gave his suffering a shape he could live inside. The film refuses to let that faith work as a rebuttal. It's a different relationship to meaning sitting next to a will that's already collapsed, not proof the collapse was a mistake. White walks out at the end, unconvinced, back toward whatever he was walking toward when the film opened. Black stays behind, his own certainty visibly cracked by a night spent failing to pass it on to someone else. Two systems for organizing a life sit in that apartment until morning. Neither one wins. 7 films, 2 failures to answer the same question. Some collapse, some weaponize the collapse. Neither was the answer Nietzsche actually wanted. That's the gap these 7 films were built to dramatize. Thank you for watching.